The raid at Los Baños in the Philippines, early Friday morning on 23 February 1945, was executed by a combined U.S. Army airborne and Filipino guerrilla task force, resulting in the liberation of 2,147 Allied civilian and military internees from an agricultural school campus turned Japanese internment camp. The 250 Japanese in the garrison were killed. It has been celebrated as one of the most successful rescue operations in modern military history. It was the second precisely executed raid by combined U.S.-Filipino forces within a month, following on the heels of the raid at Cabanatuan at Luzon on 30 January, in which 522 Allied military POWs had been rescued. The air, sea, land raid was the subject of a 2015 non-fiction book, Rescue at Los Baños, the most daring prison camp raid of World War II, by New York Times best-selling author Bruce Henderson. Background: since the landings of the U.S. 6th Army at Lingayen Gulf and the U.S. 8th Army at Nasugbu, Batangas on 9 January 1945 and 31 January 1945 respectively, to retake Luzon, the Imperial Japanese Army was being repeatedly pushed back and was increasingly becoming desperate. Soon news was filtering down to Allied commanders that the Japanese were killing innocent civilians and prisoners of war while falling back. General Douglas MacArthur was deeply alarmed about the plight of thousands of prisoners who had been interned in various camps on Luzon. Since the early days of the Pacific War, there was concern that, with deliverance so near, they might be killed. Earlier, some daring raids were carried out to rescue POWs, including one at Cabanatuan and at the University of Santo Tomas internment camp and Bilibid prison at the height of the Battle for Manila. Los Baños internment camp in Los Baños, Laguna, at the UP College of Agriculture and UP College of Forestry, now the University of the Philippines. Los Baños, which was located on a 60-acre site, was the POW and civilian internment camp, wedged between the foothills of Mount Makiling and the northern shore of Los Baños facing Laguna de Bay. The camp was being constructed next to Baker Hall, by the first group of 800 men who arrived in May 1943. In Dec. 1943, an additional 200 internees arrived from the University of Santo Tomas internment camp, followed by 500 in April 1944, and 150 in Dec. Aside from 11 Navy nurses under the command of Chief Nurse Laura M. Cobb and a few servicemen, most of the internees were civilian businessmen, teachers, bankers, and missionaries caught by the Japanese during the course of the war and incarcerated in various POW camps in the country. While incarcerated, the POWs had formed an executive committee to deal with the guards for self-governing purposes and to obtain whatever marginal freedom or concessions they could obtain from the Japanese prison authorities. Nonetheless, the internees were made to get by on dwindling rations, limited clothing, poor housing and non-existent sanitation, and endure the sadistic tendencies of the camp guards. By early 1945, the conditions in the camp turned hellish, with enforced limited rations and mounting abuse, courtesy of the camp's second-in-command, Warrant Officer Sadaraki Konishi. Mission: the U.S. 11th Airborne Division under Maj. Gen. Joseph Swing arrived in the Southwest Pacific in mid-1944. Prior to taking part in the invasion of Leyte in October, the division had undergone theater combat training in New Guinea, together with the 503rd Parachute Regimental Combat Team. These were the only U.S. Army airborne forces in the Pacific Theater of Operations. After Leyte, the 188th Glider Infantry Regiment landed at Nasugbu with the U.S. 8th Army on 31 January, while the 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment parachuted into Tagaytay Ridge. On 3 February 1945, Gen. Swing was tasked with a rescue mission to rescue the internees at the Los Baños camp, some 20 miles behind the Japanese lines. However, with the 11th Airborne committed to a series of pitched battles south of Manila and the resolute Japanese defense at Nichols Field and Fort William McKinley, immediate deployment was out of the question. As an interim measure, Maj. Gen. Swing ordered his subordinates to develop a plan that could be implemented at the earliest possible moment. Then on the 18th of February, the 1st Battalion, 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment, under Major Henry Burgess, the main unit assigned to carry out the mission, was pulled out from its battlefield position on the so-called Genko Line, a fortified system of interlocking pillboxes and anti-tank fortifications running along the southern Manila district of Las Piñas, and proceeded to Parañaque district to rest and regroup. By the 20th of February 1945, the conditions on Luzon turned favorable, such that the various elements could be withdrawn from combat and apprised of their mission. They were ordered to their staging posts and ready to go, with the raid scheduled for 700 on the 23rd of February. For the jump phase of the assault plan, the 511th Regimental Commander, Lt. Col. Edward Blatty, appointed Company B, 1st Battalion, 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 11th Airborne Division under 1st Lt. John Ringler, together with the Headquarters Company Light Machine Gun Platoon of 2nd Lt. Walter Hettinger. The 188th Glider Infantry Regiment of Colonel Robert Soule had perhaps the most daunting task, trying to stave off a counterattack from the main highway. Bivouacked across the San Juan River were some 8,000–10,000 Japanese troops of the 8th Tiger Division, commanded by Lt. Gen. Shizo Yokoyama. Guerrilla connection. The various Filipino guerrilla groups operating in the vicinity of Los Baños played a key role that led to the successful liberation of the camp. Earlier, in the partisan war against the Japanese, a combined guerrilla command was formed to bring some order to the effort by the defunct USAFFE Command, which was in charge of unconventional forces in the Philippines, and renamed as the General Guerrilla Command of Luzon under Maj. D. Vanderpool of the U.S. Army. Under the GGC, the Hunters ROTC guerrillas, made up originally of former cadets of the Philippine Military Academy along with some former ROTC and college students under the command of Col. Frank Quesada, were one of the most active groups. Other formations include President Quezon's own guerrillas under Col. Phil Avancena, Red Lions Unit, the Filipino-Chinese 48th Squadron, and the Villegas Group of the Hukbalahaps were tasked by the GGC to coordinate operations related to Los Baños. Among the members of Hunters ROTC guerrillas who participated in the raid was the future Filipino film star Mario Montenegro, then only 16 years old. Planned long before the arrival of the U.S. Liberation Forces, the guerrillas conducted intelligence operations that gathered precise inside information about the POWs in Los Baños and their guards. Many prisoners were longtime friends of partisan families before the war, with Lt. Col. Gustavo Ingalls designated as overall guerrilla coordinator with the 11th Airborne Division. Information was shared with Maj. Gen. Swing's command staff, including Col. Henry Muller, and Col. Douglas Quant, as well as other top planners, who fine-tuned the final strategy. On the 12th of February, Freddy Zervalakos, a 19-year-old Greek Filipino, slipped out of the camp and made contact with the guerrillas. He was sent back into the camp with the promise that the internees will be rescued. But the internee committee decided that it would be best for the prisoners to do nothing. A week later, another escapee from the camp, a civilian engineer named Pete Miles, gave further valuable information to the 11th A.B. Division planners, including the daily routine in the camp, details of troop positions in the exact location of the internees. This proved a great asset to the planners and enabled them to finalize the four-phase plan that was timed to coincide with the Guards' exercise period. which was conducted by the Japanese troops without clothing, equipment, or weapons, thereby minimizing the risk of harm to the internees during the rescue. Meanwhile, two LTs made a reconnaissance of the drop zone with the guerrillas and the two internees. The joint U.S. Army guerrilla assault plan was as follows. Phase 1 would begin when the 11th Airborne's Provisional Reconnaissance Platoon, under the command of 1 LT, George Scar, together with some 20 Filipino guerrilla guides, would travel behind enemy lines by Bancash across Laguna Lake 2 nights before the raid, where they would wait for assault teams under SGTS. Martin Squires, Terry Santos, Cliff Town and Robert Angus would assault the camp gate from different angles. At 700 on the 23rd of February they were charged with marking the drop zones, landing zones and for the neutralizing of the camp gate guards, simultaneous with an attack from the remaining directions by the guerrillas' 45th Hunter Regiment under Lt. Carl Ingalls, who will also surround the entire camp perimeter prior to the signaled hour. In Phase 2, B Company, 1st Battalion, 511 PIR led by Lieutenant John Ringler, with the support of Lieutenant Walter Hettinger's machine gun platoon, would parachute into a small drop zone next to the camp, rendezvous with a Huk Balahap guerrilla unit, neutralize the remaining camp guards and secure the internees. In Phase 3, the remainder of 1st Battalion would board 54 LVT tracked amphibious assault vehicles of the 672nd Amphibian Tractor Battalion commanded by Lt. Carl Joseph W. Gibbs at 400 and slip into Laguna de Bay and head for Maiden Point, near San Antonio, some 2 miles from the camp. A recon platoon squad under Sergeant Leonard Hahn would mark and guide them to their landing point. Here they would travel overland and make their way to the camp, scheduling to arrive shortly after 700. They would then carry the internees back to Maiden Point and make good their escape to Mamitij village. Phase 4 involved the 188th Glider Infantry Regiment and Company C of the 637th Tank Destroyer Battalion together with elements of the 472nd and 675th Field Artillery Battalions, under Colonel Robert H. Soule. The force would move down Highway 1 to act as a diversionary force and to engage the Japanese 8th Division, if necessary, so as to protect the flank. Other guerrilla units such as Markingsville American troops and the 48th Chinese Squadron were to set up roadblocks in the towns of Calauin Bay and Pila to delay possible Japanese reinforcements. The Hunters ROTC 47th Regiment under Lt. Carl Emmanuel de Ocampo would do the same in the Calamba Pansol area. The backup 11th A.B. Pack howitzers in Calamba, Laguna area was to bombard the road towards Los Baños. All the surrounding approaches into the main camp would be secured. The townspeople were briefed and asked to vacate Los Baños by the local PQOG Home Guard units. Raid. Under cover of darkness on the 21st of February 1945, Lt. Scar and his 31-man platoon left the north shore of Laguna de Bay and headed across the lake in 3 Bancash. Lt. Scar and 6 men led the way while the separate assault team of 23 men followed soon after. Avoiding Japanese patrol craft on the lake, they landed near Nanhire and met with local guerrillas and some camp escapees at the local schoolhouse. Included in the group were Freddie Zervalakos and Benjamin Edwards, another young escapee, who sketched the layout of the camp on the schoolhouse blackboard. Lt. Scar decided to split his group into 6 teams, assigning a number of guerrillas to each team. Edwards and Zervalakos each accompanied one team. On the night of the 22nd of February, they journeyed through the jungle and rice paddies to their starting points. At 400 on the 23rd of February 1945, the 1st Battalion 511 PIR boarded 54 amphibious tractors, slipped into Laguna de Bay, and headed for Maiden Point. They also managed to reach their destination without alerting any Japanese defenders and headed off for the remaining 2 miles overland journey to the camp, aiming to arrive just after 700. Meanwhile, LT. Ringler's B Company, 511th PIR together with the light machine gun platoon, had spent the moonless night of the 22nd of February waiting at Nichols Field where, in the early dawn, they donned their parachutes, put on their equipment, and loaded onto 9 C-47s of the 75th Troop Carrier Squadron, under the command of Major Don Anderson, for the short flight. Flying unopposed by Japanese aircraft or anti-aircraft fire, they soon arrived at their destination, which was clearly marked with green smoke by the reconnaissance platoon. The recon platoon teams led by LT, SCAR, and SGTS, Angus, Call and Town took out the guard posts on the north and west side of the camp. The Hunters ROTC guerrillas chased after and killed the Japanese guards. At 700, coming in at the planned 500 feet jump altitude and in 3 vs of 3 aircraft, LT. Ringler's paratroopers dropped from their aircraft. B Company charged the camp 15 to 20 minutes after the attack was launched, entering through openings cut by the scouts. The firefight was short and intense, and with the Japanese defeated, the internees freed. The 54 Amtraks of the 672nd Amphibious Battalion came ashore in 9 columns of 6 vehicles after green smoke grenades were popped on San Antonio Beach by Sergeant Harnan Marking's guerrillas. At 0658, led by Burgess, the Amtraks reached the camp, knocking out a pillbox and crashed through the camp gate. Evacuation. Mindful of the need for speed, LT. Ringler's men rounded up the internees as rapidly as they could. Some prisoners refused to leave, so LT. Hetlinger's men burned the camp's remaining huts, to encourage the internees to the Amtraks. At first, the disabled, along with the women and children, were loaded onto the waiting vehicles, while the more able internees formed a walking column and headed for the beach and freedom. In the distance, across the lake, intense fire was heard. That sound was from the Seoul Task Force. Early that morning, the diversionary force of the 188th Glider Infantry Regiment and Company C of the 637th Tank Destroyer Battalion, together with elements of the 472nd and 675th Field Artillery Battalions under Seoul, rolled out into Highway 1 and attacked across the San Juan River. They ran into Japanese opposition near the Letria Hills where casualties were taken, but by mid-morning they had cleared the area and were marching towards Los Baños and cutting off the road between the Japanese 8th Tiger Division and Los Baños. From an elevated position, Seoul could see, in the distance, the Amtraks on the beach heading back to Mamitide. So he ordered his force to conduct a defensive withdrawal and to re-establish its bridgehead across the San Juan River. Finally, after 2 trips, the last of the Amtraks departed at 1500 for Mamitide. The internees included a 3-day-old baby girl Lois Kathleen McCoy. Frank Buckles, who would become the last surviving American veteran of World War I, was also among the prisoners. He had been captured as a civilian in Manila. Aftermath. 2 of Sergeant Santos's recon platoon members and 4 Filipino guerrillas were wounded. 2 188th Glider Infantry Regiment soldiers, John T. Duron and Vernal Ray McMurtry, were killed at the Letria Hills engagement. The hand-to-hand skirmish was not without casualties. A handful of guards were able to muster a makeshift defense, killing 2 young hunter guerrillas, PFC Atanasio Castillo and PFC Anselmo Sola. Their bodies were recovered and buried beside the college chapel. First-hand accounts include that of former internee, Louis Thomas Watty, vice president of the POW committee, who said, The ensuing fight went on for very long minutes without let-up. Enemy defenders caught by total surprise were pinned and cut down mercilessly by liberators' fire. The hunter experience through the years in irregular warfare paid off handsomely. It was also true of the paratroopers who were veterans of the South Pacific before they landed in Luzon. A few days after the rescue, the Japanese in full force, led by the escaped Sadaraki Konishi, returned to Los Baños. Upon seeing that there were no POWs in sight, the Japanese turned their wrath on the remaining civilians in town who had failed to heed the warning from the guerrillas to leave. With the help of pro-Japanese MAKAPILI, the Japanese massacred some 1,500 men, women and children, and burned their homes, as well as those in the adjacent towns suspected of collaborating with the liberators. Konishi was tried for his war crimes after the war and hanged. Historical significance: I doubt that any airborne unit in the world will ever be able to rival the Los Baños prison raid. It is the textbook airborne operation for all ages and all armies. General Colin Powell, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the outstanding success of the Los Baños raid incorporated many facets that revolutionized generations of future special military operations. Thorough planning, reliable intelligence, stealth, speed and surprise, superior firepower, cooperation by friendly forces, and support of the populace gave the planners and forces implementing the raid an advantage that resulted in few casualties.